Today's episode is sponsored by Kelly Stark. Hello and welcome to Film Pro Productivity and Success, the podcast that helps film professionals and other creative people to live a more focused, effective and happy life. My name is Carter Ferguson and this is episode 59, talking mindset with keynote speaker and mindset coach Dee Bleakley. Yes, folks, welcome back, and as the title says, I will be talking today with a brilliant guest, Dee Bleakley, about all things mindset. Now, this was recorded last week before the coronavirus really got going here, and I really didn't plan to release it for about a month or so, but I've pulled it forward as what we talk about, I believe, could be very useful to you during the current situation. And this is the fifth in a series of episodes which are being released specifically to help you deal with the stresses and emotions which you may be experiencing during the current corona situation. But if you are listening to this in the future, please note that it largely covers where your head needs to be to achieve success in your everyday life and work as well. Now, in the last episode, which is a solo show, I detailed the problems which can arise when information overload comes your way, and I also outlined a number of solutions to help you deal with it. It's something I'd had a lot of trouble with, and I was really glad to take on that episode because it's actually helped me to cut through some of this information overload I'm facing in my day-to-day life anyway. But if you missed out on it, and indeed the one before, which was about coping with anxiety, then you really should go back and have a listen. They've both been some of my most popular episodes to date. For now, though, enjoy the interview. And here he is, Dee Bleakley. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. So you're a keynote speaker and a mindset coach. Can you just tell me a little bit about how you got started in this?
Yeah, so basically, I actually started as a high school teacher and discovered very quickly, I used to teach geography, discovered very quickly that I actually had more passion, not for teaching young people about volcanoes and glaciers, as interesting as all that is. My real passion actually lay in listen to young people and what their kind of ideas and aspirations were for the future. So I basically started to take a sidestep from geography teaching, and with all my classes would do a little kind of mindset lesson basically on some things that I had been doing some professional reading on. And they went quite well, which basically led the school I was working at to kind of ask, could you do maybe like a small assembly, which led to bigger assemblies, which led to a parents' night. And I just kind of kept doing it. And it was when a parent said to me, listen, this stuff's great. Could you come? I've got a local business in town. Could you come and speak to my staff? And that's when I kind of went, right, this is obviously valuable to people. And maybe there's a business venture in this. So I didn't immediately just quit my job as a teacher. I narrowed it down. So I kind of went from 5 days a week down to 4, down to 3. I still actually currently work 1 day a week in a school. I think that's important. I don't teach geography. I do a pupil support role where I work one-to-one with pupils. But yeah, it wasn't like a complete jump to teacher to speaker. It was slow and steady. And yeah, I've kind of turned my career fully into keynote speaking. So I travel around high schools, colleges, universities, and also corporate businesses and do keynote speeches, all on things centered around mainly mindset, but do a variety of other things as well.
Yeah, and I actually met you at an event. Was it a networking event in Glasgow we were at?
Yeah.
And as soon as you introduced yourself, I was like, he's interesting. And then that brief chat we had after the event had happened, I was like so desperate to get you on the show. So thank you very much for coming on and spending some time with us. So did you just have an interest in this sort of thing? You're saying that you just started giving them little lessons and things and that you were reading. How did that manifest itself? How did it come together?
Yeah, no, massively. I basically, if I go right back, and this is going to sound ridiculous, when I was, you get that question, what do you want to do when you're older? When I was like 14, 15, when people asked me that question, what do you want to do when you're older? My answer to everyone was, I don't know. But internally, I always had this little notion of I would love to be like a motivational speaker. And the reason I didn't say it out loud is because, particularly in this country, it's seen as really cheesy, really corny. I hate when sometimes people ask me what you do, and I have to say I'm a mindset coach / kind of keynote / motivational speaker. I tend to get that reaction. People kind of vomit in their own mouth. And I get it. I get where that comes from. I think my sister once put it to me when she discovered that I was taking this sidestep. My sister, I should say, is also a teacher. She was like, "Oh, you're going to go into that. You're going to be one of those people that stands up and talks about themselves and then expects everyone to feel better." And that kind of, for me, summed up what a lot of, these kind of keynote speakers can be. And I made a very conscious effort to make sure I don't do that. I try to ground as much of what I talk about in psychology. So I do a lot of reading, and really I view my role as taking sometimes complex ideas, sometimes not, sometimes quite simple ideas, and I try to take these ideas and make them more palatable for an audience. And the response is, it always surprises me, because when you're immersed in something, you kind of take it for granted. But when you speak to people, and I mean the majority of people, it's kind of mind-blowing concepts to them.
Yeah.
So basically, if I go back to your question about how I started, and I did always have a thing when I used to play a lot of sports when I was at high school.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
I always really enjoyed, like, I don't say mentor because I was young, but I loved talking to people to give them the motivation or the attitude, the right attitude within a team, or even if it was people that I didn't necessarily play with, people that I knew were playing sport or involved in different things. I loved having that kind of coach role where I would give them a little bit of advice. The only thing I can say is, I know this is going to sound ridiculous, but I did as a teen watch a lot of Rocky. And I don't know if some sort of, primitive, very early motivation came from that. That was something that, from the age of, I think my dad introduced me to that when I was like 12. And probably from the age of 12 to 15, I just kind of immersed myself in those movies and became a big fan. I don't know if that gave me that feeling. I feel like I really helped. I felt motivated by those films. I would love to motivate and give people that buzz of that feeling.
Yeah.
So I did have this very early sense that I like chatting to people about how to improve their performance, even though back then I had no real way of doing it. And so when the opportunity came to maybe start a business, because I always thought of it as a very American, this idea that a motivational speaker, that's a very American thing. You don't get that in the UK.
Yep.
When I started to research, I realized, no, there's definitely a market for it here. But I've been out to America and I've worked with some speakers out there, and it's a completely different style over there. And what audience is looking for is completely different. So it is about knowing your market. And so one of the key things I have to do, being a kind of a mindset coach speaker in the UK, is make it kind of a bit more real and a bit more gritty and less, I guess, that kind of fluffy, motivational, good feeling stuff. I try to lean away from that and give people tools they can use as opposed to just a good feeling.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you as well about people in the UK versus people in the US, because I get kind of information as to who's actually listening to the show, and there's always three or four times the number of people listening to the show in the States as are actually listening to the show in the UK, and I do find it a struggle. And in fact, I kind of also bring up productivity techniques, but in effect they're motivational techniques to make people more successful in conversation with people, because I'm so desperate to get them to realise how useful this stuff could be and actually apply it. But I'm kind of faced quite often with this dismissal of it, of even the concept.
It's this idea of getting people to take action.
Yeah.
And if you boil down what is motivation, well, you're giving people the tools, or even if it is a motivation to action, you're getting people to do something. And I love America. And for your US listeners, I'm not in any way, shape, or form dissing American motivation speakers. I follow a lot of them. I mean, Gary Vee, Tony Robbins is someone I've read and watched a lot for years. It's just a different way of doing it. I think what somebody once said to me, if you look at like your Gary Vee, for example, he's got that kind of like, can I swear in this?
Yeah, I'll cut it out, but you can swear in it and I'll just beep it out.
Well, I was going to say, he's got that kind of FU approach. Like, this is how you do it. And if you don't do it like this, then shut the F up and move on. And people buy into that. People like that. I like that. Someone once said to me that I was the most, they said to me I was the most non-threatening motivational speaker that they had ever encountered. And I said, what do you mean by that? And he told me he'd been out to America and been to some big conferences. He said what he really liked about my style was that rather than be like, this is what you have to do, and if you don't do this, you're a loser, or you got to do it this way because I've been there and I've done it, and you got it. It wasn't that. What I kind of do is go, listen, here's what research and reading tells us. This is what we know. Here's how you can apply it for you and how this can impact you. This is the reason why if you use this stuff, it could massively help you. And then from there, that's up to you. And I kind of leave it on the shelf. I take the ideas, I present them to people, I demonstrate how it can help them, and then I leave it there. I don't force it. It's like, listen, it's there. If you want it, take it. If you don't, it's totally your choice. And it's that kind of allowing people to make their own decision. I'm a big believer that it was a study I read once within high school. And the idea is if I have a class of, say, 30 pupils and I dish out, a revision sheet, and I give every single pupil a revision sheet and say, go home, look at that. If you learn that, it's gonna help you in the test coming up. That if I force, I don't say force feed it, but if I make sure that everyone takes it and I make sure everyone puts it in their bag, there's actually only 30% of the class will actually look at it. Now, if on the other hand, I leave those 30 revision sheets on my desk and go, listen, everything you need to know for your test is in this, come up and get one. If you don't want one, don't bother taking one. I might get 60% will actually take one. But of that 60% that take one, over 50% are going to look at them because they've taken the action themselves to take one.
Yeah. I mean, that is the point you were making earlier. It's like you can give the advice of, and I see a lot of advice on there, like positive thinking will get you where you want to go, sort of thing. But the reality is, positive thinking without actually taking action, without putting some energy into it, is not probably going to get you where you want to go. It just might make you feel better about it as you go on. Yeah,
that's one of my key messages. Positive thinking is great. We know it's great. And I'm going to talk about that today and how powerful it is. But ultimately, positive thinking means very, very little without some positive action to back it up. Because you've all had those feelings of, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And you get that little buzz, that little feeling in your gut. But then how many of us actually have that little buzz and then don't fully act on it in part? And it's about getting that little step from positive thinking to positive action. That's the kind of key part for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's one of the things that comes up time and time again in this kind of productivity show that I do, that as we just said, if you take action, things will happen. If you don't, it won't. But how to get yourself to take action is kind of what some of the productivity techniques that I do gift people is particularly my big thing at the moment is Jenny Ditzler's book, Your Best Year Yet, where basically you strategize your year ahead. And then every month and every week and every day, you break down what you're going to do that's going to get you closer to 10 major goals that I'm looking for this year. And it's that technique which helps me to take action. Another thing that I do to help me take action is with this podcast is I've got them all written on the wall and I tick them off if they're researched, I tick them off if they're recorded, I tick them off if I've done the promotion for them, and I can kind of feel I'm getting somewhere.
Kind of like a little production line of productivity. I was just about to say that, it's something that so many people know about. And again, your listeners at home will know this. It's this idea that you're meant to put your goals on the wall. You're meant to display them somewhere. And it's something even years ago I knew I was to do, but just never did it. Just for whatever reason. It's like, but I'm okay. This idea that, I know that helps some people, but I'm sure I can be productive without those things. And of course, when you actually take the action and start to, my room, I've got an office space in my flat, and it's just full of whiteboards, and they're all different things, posters, and I've got things stuck up and little, and it's all stuff that
I'm just looking around. Sorry to interrupt. I'm just looking around to see if you're in my room, because I've got whiteboards and posters and exactly the same thing, because I need to make it as easy as possible for me to take action.
Yep. And the stats on these things, that you do become more productive when you can see your goals on the wall every morning. It's true, these things really do work. So I would definitely advise that if you have these goals in mind, because they will be in mind, then start to display them. And once you have that physical, they become a little bit more real.
Absolutely. It's really, really important. Just to go back on something you talked about earlier, you were referring to Rocky, and you are not the only person that's got that kind of kick from Rocky, even just from the music of Rocky, never even mind what the actual film was. In fact, I was watching, I'm sure it was a Joe Rogan, watching a YouTube podcast, but it was filmed as well. And he was talking to some guys on that.
Oh, the military guy. Yeah, I think I've seen this.
Could have been, he was talking about Rocky. And was he the guy that was on the set of Expendables, and he said that Sylvester Stallone was the alpha dog of alpha dogs?
Yeah. That, I think he talked about it in that podcast as well, but there was something that I didn't fully understand as a 12-year-old kid watching it. But I think as I get older and you analyze and reflect them, I love movies generally. I'm a bit of a movie nerd, probably not as much as yourself, but I do watch a lot, and I think as I get older, it's not that Rocky is a guy that he's a great boxer, or that he's throughout those films. It's not really. I mean, it's coined in the Rocky Balboa film that he did in like 2006, where it's really not about how hard you hit, but how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. Mm-hmm. And it's that idea if that key scene in Rocky 1 is when he gets knocked down, and Mickey's telling him to stay down, and it's not just for me him getting up. It's the look on Apollo's face, because it's that feeling of like what do I have to do, and to have that sort of tenacity, I think, is what propelled me probably in sport a lot as I then hit my teens.
Yeah, because
I just had this never give up. Even if I wasn't the best at it, I just wouldn't stop, and I learned a lot through that. And I guess that's where the mindset comes from, because physical is a huge part, but if you can mentally show that you're willing to go further than someone, it breaks them down. And I didn't, I wasn't a fighter, I didn't do any boxing. I'm from Northern Ireland originally, and ended up playing table tennis for Ireland. My claim to fame is I was Ireland's #1 under 16 table tennis player.
Awesome.
So I can sign autographs anytime you want. But no, that was my thing. But a lot of that, I think a lot of my attitude towards sport came from Rocky, and a lot of my attitudes from Rocky and sport ended up filtering through into my career.
Yeah, I mean, there's an episode coming out this season which is about resilience, because we have so much rejection. I know we have rejection in day-to-day life, but particularly if you work in the arts, if you're an actor, you're getting rejected far more often usually than you're getting the gig. And if you're a filmmaker or a theatre maker and you're applying for funding, the chances are very, 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 very low that you're going to get through. But that resilience, I think, is a sports technique or sports element which we can bring into our lives.
Yeah, I mean, you hear so many stories of actors, sometimes in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, not getting a break until, I think it was Morgan Freeman and a few others. Yeah. And so I get it must be incredibly difficult, but if you give up, you give up. And I think even when I started business, I kind of knew the risks involved, that I could give this a go and it might go nowhere. But ultimately, my game plan was that if I give it a go, and I really give it a go, I don't mean just give it a half go, I don't half-ass it, I really push and put everything into it. At the point it fails, if it fails, which it hasn't, thankfully, but if it did ever fail, as long as if it failed and I got to that point and I could look back hand on heart and say, well, I did everything I could have, then I could leave it with no regrets.
Yeah.
The number one thing, when I work with adults, the number one thing I hear more than anything else are stories of regret. Mm-hmm. So after I do an event, I will guarantee get at least 3 people afterwards come up to me and talk to me about how they really wanted to do this thing, but they never quite managed. Yeah. Maybe it was, I wanted to do this thing, but I never quite got around to it. I really wanted to succeed at this, but I never put, a full amount of effort into it. I really wanted to do this, but, my parents stopped me from doing it. And you kind of realize, man, these are things that are avoidable if you're fully committed to going for them. Mm-hmm. And if you do go for them and they don't work out, well, at least, you can look back and go, but I give it a go.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you just have the regret of what if.
It reminds me of those, sorry to interrupt you, that reminds me of those YouTube videos that I've seen as well, with 5 pieces of advice for life from a 100-year-old, and it's always about regret.
Yeah. Well, the number one bit of advice comes from people in palliative care, I think, is to not live your life to the expectations of others, but go and do what you want to do. And that's the number one bit of advice from people on their deathbed. So, and that's consistent, so it is about taking chances, but also having the safety net in your mind that if it doesn't work out, you'll have the satisfaction of knowing that you tried.
Yeah.
I think that's important. I think a lot of people don't try things because of the scary risk. And I'm not by any means telling people to go and quit the job and do what you love. I obviously didn't do that. I slowly moved away from high school teaching. But what I learned through it is that when you take little risks like that, your brain, your mind essentially gets a little bit better at taking other risks, to the point where I know I do things, take risks and gambles on different things that people around me, friends and family, think I'm crazy. But to me, I don't actually consider them that risky because of just, I guess, my mindset is in a slightly different place, because every little chance and opportunity you take can lead to something else. And I sometimes do daft things, actually. On the theme of Rocky, there was a couple of years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, they do a Rocky run in Philadelphia, and I had just turned 30. It was the second year they had it on, and my immediate reaction was, I could do that some year. And then it turned to, well, wait a minute, I've got time, I've got the finances to do it, and I've got the fitness to do it. Why don't I just do it?
Yeah.
And over a weekend, just signed myself up. It was like 6 weeks time. I went and did it. Flew over, literally just on my own. Flew over on a Friday, did the run Saturday, and flew back on the Monday, and just went for it. And it was one of the, I always knew someday I would run up the Rocky steps, and I thought, why not just do it on, when I'm 30 years old, it'll mark the year. And yeah, away I went. I know a lot of people, well, you just booked it, that was it, you didn't? I was like, yeah, just did it, why not?
That's absolutely brilliant. I love that.
Yeah. And I learned a lot through that as well. Actually, that whole experience was, I was pretty sure I was going to do it anyway. I remember actually I was in Glasgow. I actually was meeting a friend, and I was just going to run the idea past them, and we should just go for it. And before we had the chat, he said, "Do you want to get some chips?" So I was like, "Yeah, let's get some chips." And we went down, and I swear it was like, I think it was a Sunday night, and there was a couple of girls in the chippy who clearly had a bit to drink. And they had ordered their chips first. So they ordered the chips. This girl walks to the side. I then order my chips. And as I'm ordering my chips, I hear her hum the Rocky theme tune, right? So I then order my chips, and I just turned to her and I was like, is there any reason, just out of curiosity, that you're humming the Rocky theme tune? And she looked at me and she was like, I actually have no idea. And I immediately went, cool, I'm booking it. That's it.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah. So that was me.
Would you say that did you have like one sudden great breakthrough that made you decide you wanted to become to go in this direction from the school teacher? Was there any one specific thing that happened to make you change?
I don't know if it was one specific. There was definitely I got a feeling from doing it that I didn't get from teaching classes about geography.
Okay.
And so I got this. I guess it was a buzz, but I guess it was also a feeling of like, I was probably like 20. Maybe 22, 23, and I had never felt in any real thing that I'd done before this buzz of like, I'm enjoying it, these pupils are enjoying it, but more than that, I'm actually helping them in quite a significant way.
Yeah.
So it maybe wasn't one specific thing, but certainly it felt very right, if that makes sense. It just felt like, man, this is I think a good thing for me, and it's obviously a good thing. And then as I continue to do it, I get an email from someone from an event I did like 2 years ago, and I don't remember that person specifically, but they'll get back and just say, listen, you spoke to me at this event, and I know I've never got in touch with you, but because of this, I did this.
Yeah.
And that is a really powerful moment, because you don't know, people I can speak on stage for an hour, 2 hours. People don't remember everything that you say. That's just not going to happen, but they will remember how you made them feel. And if you can give them a feeling that gives them empowerment and makes them realize that they're much more capable than they maybe think they are.
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying. I mean, so what great value do you think you bring to people when you're up there?
I think from feedback that I get, if you're chatting to a lot of people just, they have this feeling that you're talking directly to them. Because when you talk about human behavioral psychology, I mean, the stats on it are pretty general in that a lot of the things as humans we go through, we all, although we have different aspects and different threads, they all very much fit a similar mold. And so actually, even though I can generally speak about things, people really feel like they're being spoken to very specifically. And once people feel like they're being talked to specifically, it empowers them to take action. Because if it is that, as you said, serendipity, it's that feeling of like, maybe I came along at a moment in their life where that's exactly what they needed to hear at that time. Mm-hmm. And so when people have that and grasp that, it just empowers them to go and do it. And sometimes, I've said this, I tell people things they already know. A lot of what I talk about is common sense, and common sense isn't always common action. Sorry, common sense isn't always common practice. So we know what we should do, but we don't always do it. And it's just giving people that little bit of extra, listen, go do it. You know what you have to go and do, so go do it. And sometimes it can be as simple as that. But essentially, when it comes to mindset, one of the first things I do is talk about the word mindset, because it's a word that we hear, in particular the last sort of 4 or 5 years. It's a word that's become much more used. And the idea of mindset is as simple as two people looking at the exact same thing and viewing it differently. So we come across that with the glass of water, is it half full, is it half empty? That sort of idea. Mm-hmm. That two different people can look at the same thing and just see it slightly different. And essentially, in a word, what your mindset is your attitude. It's your attitude towards anything, your attitude towards everything. And so once we kind of look at that, then you have to start asking yourself questions about how I view things.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, mindset is mainly subconscious.
Yeah.
So if I ask someone, I'll ask you, do you agree with the sentiment, if at first I don't succeed, I try again? Would you agree with that sort of line of thought?
Yes. Up to the
Yes.
point where, what is it, the Einstein quote, expecting different, doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting different results. If I've said
is
that
insanity,
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Up to that point.
Up to that point. So then, if I broke it down a little bit more, and I said, okay, so let's say that you've applied for a job or maybe a university or whatever, and you didn't get in. Would you be the type of person that would find out why you went wrong, then gain that experience, and then apply for the exact same position or job again?
Possibly.
If
I was very into it and really thought that was the right place for me.
Okay. So if you were passionate about it, you would.
Yes.
So one of the things that we find with mindset is that not everybody, but 90 to 95% of people view themselves as having a very positive mindset, right? Because you can tell yourself that I'm a very positive person and I go for things, I do things. But actually when it's tested, it's not always the case. And that's because when your subconscious takes over, which is the main, so 90% of your mind is subconscious, that when sometimes when you're asked or given a challenge, despite the conscious part of your brain in a context of talking about mindset will tell you, I've got a positive mindset, that when we leave the conversation of mindset and just give you a task, that your actual actions don't really back up what you've said you would do. So I guess it's this idea we have quite an inflated view of ourselves. We tend to think that we have a super, super positive, high motivation and drive to do things, but actually when tested, maybe don't. So it's about finding out that difference. How do we bridge that gap between what we're saying and what we're doing, which is really, really key.
One thing you said there was about changing your attitude, and I'd looked up a couple of quotes before I started, and I hope I could drop them in. And Maya Angelou says, if you don't like something, change it. If you can't change it, change your attitude. And that's exactly what you were saying there.
Well, there's kind of three protocols. If you're in a situation or challenge that you don't like, you've actually only really got three things you can do. So if you don't like something, the first thing you should do is try to change it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So ultimately, if you can, just for in whatever capacity you have to, change that situation. Now, there is going to be times where you cannot change the situation. So that's when you go to protocol 2. If you can't change it, the second thing you should do is just remove yourself from that situation. Okay. So something you don't like and you cannot change it, protocol 2, just remove yourself from it. But there's also going to be times where you could be in a challenging situation where you can't change it and you also cannot remove yourself from it. Mm-hmm. Your third protocol and final protocol in that scenario is to just accept it and deal with it, basically. An example I sometimes use is if you're stuck in traffic. Okay, a lot of us get stuck in traffic. I get stuck in traffic all the time, I drive quite a lot. Essentially, there's a situation that nobody likes traffic. So if you're stuck in it, you can't change it, right? Protocol 1, you can't just remove the traffic from, I've seen in Bruce Almighty, I think he does that. Other than being God, all right, we're not going to do that. So protocol 2, remove yourself from it. Now, if you're stuck in the middle of the motorway, you're not going to be able to do that either.
Yep.
So that kind of leaves you with protocol 3, which is just accept it.
Yep.
Don't get annoyed about it. Don't get frustrated about it. Don't phone home to complain about it, because that's what we tend to do. It's the first thing people do. They tend to phone a loved one and kind of share your woes with them and kind of have maybe a slightly negative impact on their day. So it's just about accepting that it's traffic and there's nothing you can do about it. And at that point, personally, I choose to view it as a part of my day where I don't have to do anything, which is quite good. Yeah. We do so much and we're always on the go. It's just a little portion of my day that for 10, 20, maybe even 30 or maybe even 60 minutes, I can just chill a wee bit and take a little bit of time, listen to some music and just that's my choice. Yeah. And I think that I'm not telling everyone that's what you have to do, but it's your choice. You can do that. If you want to get frustrated about it, then by all means get frustrated about it, but there's really no need. Mm-hmm. It's given people the idea that they're actually in a lot more control of their mindset than they maybe think. Yeah. We talk about mindset being, people say positive and negative or open and closed or optimistic, pessimistic. There was Carol Dweck who I don't know if you've came across the terms fixed and growth mindsets.
Yes.
Right. So the reason she called the two types of mindsets fixed and growth as opposed to positive or negative, she just felt it more accurately described what the mindsets were. So somebody with a growth mindset is someone who believes that through time or hard work or effort, they can essentially grow as a person. They can get better at things, and they can maybe even change their mindset towards having a more positive outlook and grow. And that's how we grow as people. People with a fixed mindset, it isn't that they believe that they just can't do anything. People with a fixed mindset are a little bit like, if you can imagine, a dog tied to a post, right, or a pole. So that dog can move around a little bit, and that person will believe they can get a little bit better at stuff, but fundamentally they believe that they are completely fixed to that position. So they have a limited amount of maneuvering space. And so they tend to, over time, become people who are more negative. They moan a lot, they complain a lot, and they tend to not take any new challenges on or new opportunities on. The other way of looking at it is mindset very much grows over time. So I'm not a huge golfer, but if you could imagine the point where if you hit a golf ball, if a golfer hits with a driver a ball, at the point where the ball meets the club head, the tiniest little degree of difference on the club head will have a huge impact over the trajectory of the ball over time. So the tiniest little degree, and what we're saying is, when it comes to your mindset, your little knee-jerk response to a challenge or an opportunity, or your little knee-jerk response to how you look at something over days, weeks, months, and years affects the course of your entire life.
Yeah.
And equally, having a more negative fixed mindset over months and years has a much more negative. What you'll find is, when you go 300 yards, the tiniest little degree has actually made hundreds or of feet of difference between where the balls can lie.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, over the course of your life, you can actually end up being two very different people, depending on where your kind of center point is for your mindset.
Yeah.
And so it's important to get the knee jerk correct, and it's important to have the right response kind of as a knee jerk. It needs to be that immediate, and it takes time and it takes practice. And the more I read, the more I had this kind of just, if you have the right attitude at everything, taking opportunities. And people say to me, I wish I could be that confident when I'm up doing a presentation at work. I'm like, well, do you take opportunities? Because my first 10, 20, 50 talks were terrible because I was so nervous. But you keep doing them, and you get comfortable in that space. So I always say to people, any opportunity, I think there's another Richard Branson quote, that if you get asked to do something and you don't know how to do it, just say yes. And in the interim time, figure out how to do it. Because by taking the chances and to take the opportunities on, you create a skill set. And that skill set, it leads to other opportunities. So you're creating a kind of a positive spiral.
Is that like a skill set of courage you're talking about here? Yeah,
part of it 100% will be, because you're the person that gives things a go. But equally, you'll get those practical skills. I'm trying to think of your listeners as well. But if they get asked to do something they're not quite used to, you can have an attitude and go, "That's not my job." Or if you've got the time, you can learn how to do it, and it means that those skills are now yours. You've taken the time and effort to learn something new, and you can then that can lead to another opportunity in the future. So it's a courage thing, but it's also can give you practical skills on how to do things.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
And it's just trying to it does take practice, though. It doesn't happen overnight. It's a choice that you have to make consistently. And over time, I mean, even I once, I was on some sort of health kick, and I was trying to lower sugar intake. And so I used to love with having some Nutella on toast. And I got into this whole concept of willpower, and I got quite fascinated by it. And so I had to research a little bit about willpower, because people kind of think, some people have it, some people don't. And I literally went into the neurology of how it works and what it is. And actually, willpower is a very physical thing. Basically, your neurons in your brain are coated with a myelin sheath, which lubricates and makes neurons fire in different places in the brain quicker.
Mm-hmm.
So every time I reach for Nutella, a little neuron will fire from one part of my brain to the other. And the myelin sheath, every time that lubricant, every time I reach for Nutella, gets stronger. Okay. Yeah. So the instinct is to grab the Nutella is quicker.
Yeah.
And so very slowly I had to go, okay, I'm going to swap Nutella for peanut butter. And literally the cupboard had the Nutella and the peanut butter next to each other. And the first few days, it was like my hand would go for Nutella and then slowly turn for the peanut butter. Yeah. And then maybe after a couple of weeks, it would instantly go for the peanut butter. And then after a few more weeks, I was able to bin the Nutella, because the neurons weren't even firing that way. I'd lubricated basically a new path to peanut butter.
Yeah.
And this is a really daft example.
No, it's all very interesting, because I've done a few episodes on habits and habit forming.
Yeah. So it's that idea that actually willpower isn't this magic sauce that some people have. If you train yourself enough, and this is for anything, including mindset, your brain will naturally have a speedier process to you finding that. And I find myself very often, in situations that are dire, very quickly looking at the positives of that situation.
Well, we were talking about this before we started recording as well, because I'll let the audience obviously know that this is a pre-record, but there's a few weeks before the show will go out. We're in this coronavirus situation at the moment. Yeah. And actually, I'm training myself just now to be more stoic about situations and to be flexible and kind of, I don't know what the quote is, but bend like the reeds would with the wind. I'm trying to go with the flow and make the right decisions as I go, but it is a mind space I need to be in.
Yeah, and I get it's different. I would say that the atmosphere at the minute, and again, when this goes out to your listeners, it could be different again, but the mood is different than it ever has been in my life, certainly. And my belief is that, I think we're into something that's going to be challenging. But my ultimate belief is, I think when we come out of this, whenever that is, we are going to be so much more appreciative of everything that we have around us. And I mean, even just being able to go to a restaurant or a bar is suddenly going to feel like a treat. And I think that's not a bad thing. I think that the appreciation of what we've had, it was a few years ago, I really got into, I never liked history in school. I just didn't. I was, maybe the attitude I had was, it's all in the past. And as I've got older, have really enjoyed history a lot more. And I just, a few years ago, got really, really into my World War history, 1 and 2. And it gave me a totally different approach to again, how fortunate we are. And I think we do have a very entitled attitude towards things. And I've more recently seen that in a lot of people, this idea that, it's my life and I have full control of it. And the one thing I've been talking to people a lot of at the minute is the yin and yang symbol. Mm-hmm. And I put this out on my social media recently. But the yin and yang is a symbol, for any listeners who don't know, it's the kind of the white, or go and Google yin and yang, but it's that white and black with the two dots, circle. And a lot of people see that symbol and they think it's to do with war and peace or life and death or love and hate. So what that actually, the meaning of that symbol is that the white represents basically stability and contentment, and the black actually really represents chaos. And so what you've got is this balance, and it's kind of to remind us that we very fortunately in this country and in the West generally live predominantly in that white space. Mm-hmm. But that little black dot is there to remind you that at any point in your life, you can come across chaos, and it can just appear. Yeah. And it could be a phone call at 2 a.m. to tell you that your mum isn't well, or it can be, a financial situation. And obviously at the minute, this coronavirus seems to be that little bubble to remind you that you're not in full control. Fortunately, when things get chaotic and you maybe are in that more black area, you've still got that little white dot to remind you that you can find some level of contentment or peace or stability even amongst the chaos. Yeah. And in the most chaotic of times, that little white dot may represent just a hot meal or some shelter in the most extreme cases, but or maybe it's people in your life, but it's about looking for that white dot in times of chaos. And so I think if we're smart and we follow the guidelines and we keep an optimistic approach, then there's no doubt again that in my mind that we'll get back to that white part, and we'll be more conscious of that black dot, which I think people don't think exists. Mm-hmm. And once we're more conscious of that little black dot in our white space, it makes you more appreciative of the things that you have around you. I've no doubt that we're going to have some tough times ahead for everyone. I mean, you're talking about me that, the majority of my business is in schools and also large scale events. So those are two things that are just now completely defunct. But I'm not overly worried about it. Not overly worried about it. I think, I'll adapt and I'll change as everyone has to. But ultimately, do I have a belief that it's all going to go pear-shaped and I'm going to be stuck? No, I just don't have that. And again, that's maybe that knee-jerk response I've got to maybe a crisis situation, that ultimately I'll be okay.
Yeah, I've got a similar outlook. I'm thinking, and not just because we've mostly lived in the white space of stability that you're talking about there, but I've got faith that things will return to some degree of normality quicker than we might imagine. I mean, this is going out a few weeks from now, so maybe it'll be a zombie apocalypse, but I doubt it will be. I'm kind of looking positively at this, and the thing that's kind of, the book that I'm reading is The Daily Stoic, And Stoicism is giving me some techniques to deal with problems as they arise. That would be, if you understand that in the world there are people who lie and there are people who steal and there's people who are bad. Yeah. When someone lies to you, or when someone steals to you, you're not surprised. You don't take the hit as heavily.
Yeah, this is
the flexibility I was talking about.
Yeah, the Stoic stuff's great, and there's a really good one I like, is that when people get annoyed about something, they're just, I don't know if you've seen it, it's ABC. So A is the action, C is the consequence, and the B in the middle is your belief. Okay. So I sometimes do this with audiences, but if I say to an audience, okay, you're driving down the motorway and you're going 75 miles an hour and someone cuts you off and it's raining. Okay, so they've cut you off, you get lots of rainwater on your windscreen. What is your immediate reaction? So the action that's happened is you've been cut off on the motorway in the rain, so quite dangerous. And the consequence of that is that you're probably going to feel quite annoyed and angry about it. So if I then ask someone, okay, why are you angry? They'll instantly point at the A part of the action. Well, because he cut me off. Actually, that's not the reason you're annoyed. Yeah. The reason you're annoyed is because of the B, your belief. And your belief may look like something like, all drivers should be courteous and fair, like me. Yeah. All right. Yeah. And is that a realistic belief to have? Not really. So what if we change your belief to some drivers are terrible? Mm-hmm. It's a more realistic belief. If we repeat the scenario, you get cut off, your belief then goes, some drivers are terrible. Are you still going to be annoyed? Probably. Are you going to be as annoyed? Probably not. No. So it is about changing that belief system.
It's a great analogy, because I've so often been in a car, usually with a non-driver, when something happens, and as a driver, you know that this stuff happens all the time. Yeah. And so you just, they go, the person sitting in the passenger seat will be going, look at that person, why did they do that? And I'm like, well, they did it because they did it. I'm reacting to the world that's right about me.
Exactly. And so once you kind of lower your expectations of people, it can make you a little bit. I mean, I talk a lot about having bad customer service, and some people really go off their head at people that give them bad customer service. But ultimately, you don't know. I mean, they're human as well. You don't know what they're going through in that moment of their life with family or friends, or maybe they're just a bit of an arsehole. Yep. But ultimately, it shouldn't really get you upset and annoyed. It's just that's the type of person they are. And it doesn't really matter. And one I always say to people is, if you're struggling to let something go, I use this all the time on myself. Is this going to bother me in 5 years' time? If the answer is no, chances are I really don't need to be worrying about it. And I just kind of let it go. And there are things, when I talk to people, there are things that are scary. I can't really say to a bunch of students going through their last year in high school, are the exams going to worry you in 5 years' time? Are they going to affect your life? The answer is yes. There's absolutely things that are important and we should spend time thinking about, but there's a lot of things we don't. And I think there's more things that we don't need to worry about than what we do. And we spend too much time worrying about the things that we don't need to.
Well, that's the thing about control, isn't it? There's things that you can control and there's things that you can't. And if you accept that there's certain things in the world, like this coronavirus problem, that you personally can't do much about, then you don't need to worry about it. But there probably are, within that same problem, things that you can deal with. Because I'm in the middle of recording an episode, the season. I don't know what I've said and what I'm going to say, but I've made some stews. Basically, that was my preparation. I didn't buy this massive amount of food. I just bought enough food to make 2 stews, and I froze them. That's what I could do. And I'm kind of lucky, although unlucky, in that I lost my mum and dad in recent years, so that I don't have that. In fact, to be honest, I've lost most of that sort of age of family. That I don't have that many relatives left at that age, so I don't have certain worries that other people might have. I can,
Yeah. And I've had this week, I've had some really interesting conversations with schools and teachers in particular, but it's a very sports psychology quote, but control the controllables. If we're being told to wash our hands more and keep the social distancing, then that's what we'll do. And ultimately, a wee bit like yourself, I personally haven't got many people around me that can be affected too negatively by it. If I get it, I get it. And the statistics are showing me that I'm going to be okay. My goal, because I'm going to have a fair bit of time on my hands, given that I can't do my event speaking, is I just want to make sure that for my kind of more local community, I'm doing as much as I can. And if that means, driving around to some old people's places and delivering some food and doing my bit, then that's what I'll do. But ultimately, it's about controlling what you can control and nothing more.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've done that as well. I talk quite often about the 5 a day for good mental health, and volunteering your time to help someone else is good for you in the long run as well as that one person you're helping. You don't necessarily need to go around telling everyone about it. Although I have told people about it on the podcast a couple of times. It was more to lead by example than to say, look how great I am.
Yeah.
So you've got well into mindset there. Do you see what sort of mistakes do you see people making in this area?
I think one of the mistakes I think people make, I think I mentioned earlier, was this idea that they have an assumption that they actually have a really positive, strong mindset, when actually when it's tested, it's maybe not quite the case. And again, without dipping too much into the current circumstance with coronavirus, I have seen a little bit this week of maybe people's true colours, because you see the ones that maybe I know this is more of a crisis situation, but it's only really through a challenge or a barrier do you see the true mindset. So if I go back to the growth and fix mindset, right? So there's reactions and responses that are giveaway telltale signs of what type of mindset you have. Okay, so I guess I can go through a list here of kind of weaknesses.
Yeah, give us some examples.
And then new challenge. We've mentioned that already. And again, this doesn't have to be with coronavirus. It can be any challenge. The main barrier to anyone with a fixed mindset is that when they're faced with a new challenge, they tend to kind of fear or avoid it. All right. Now, bury their head in the sand a little bit. The idea is they'll probably view it as being something they can't manage or can't do, whether it's too stressful, has not got the time, or, it's just they've not got the skill set. And once they kind of think, well, this isn't going to work for me, or it's not going to be possible for me to do, then they'll fear and avoid not the challenge itself. They'll fear and avoid the failure. So you're actually kind of going, but it's a natural response. So like if I said to you, I want you to jump off 10-story building and fly, right? You're not going to do it because that's impossible. Therefore, your fear, breaking your arm, breaking your leg, or dying. Therefore, you're going to avoid that challenge. Yeah. But it's more that when you have that excuse, when it becomes an excuse, because what people have to realize is your mindset basically at all times tries to do the bare minimum. And it's really no more reason than it's the path of least resistance. Okay.
Yeah, the habit that you've got into.
Yes. So your mindset is going to kind of fight towards doing what's easy all the time. And so that will come up with, when a new challenge comes up, you'll kind of just avoid it. Okay. People with a growth mindset, however, they'll embrace it, but it's not just the embracing that they'll give it a go. It's the persistence. So it's not enough just to give something a go, because I can't say, well, if there's a new challenge and you give it a go, that you've now got a growth mindset. You can give it a go and then after one go think, it's not for me. It's about giving it a go and then persisting. Yeah. So if you look into the psychology of then persisting, a lot of that comes under effort. And again, if you look at effort, the fixed mindset viewpoint towards effort is that ultimately it's pointless. So it's kind of this attitude of, well, I could do that and I could do this and I could put time in, but do I really need to? I mean, is it going to benefit me? Is there a point in doing this? And once you start to question if there's a point in something, again, you're going down that more negative, that more fixed mindset. Yeah. Whereas people with a growth mindset will look at effort and view it as a kind of a path or a key to their success. Yeah. So this is the route. This is how I'm going to get from A to B. This is what I need. This is the vehicle. And so when you start to adopt and realize that effort isn't pointless, and by the way, effort isn't always enjoyable. That's the other thing. People, we live in this idea that sometimes if you're really passionate about something, you love doing it. There's elements of my business I love, and I've talked about those elements that I love, but that's a small percentage of my business. A lot of business is doing things I don't really enjoy to keep the bit that I love there. But it's a very large portion of things I don't do, but I do it with the knowledge that the effort I put into those other things, and those more boring things, actually drive the success. And, a good example sometimes I like to use is Olympic athletes. Olympic athletes get up at, 5, 6, 7 o'clock in the morning to go and run for, 5 or 10 miles. They don't enjoy that. They don't wake up and think, oh, yes, I can't wait for my 10-mile run. They go and they know it's hard work, but they also know ultimately that hard work and the blood, sweat and tears are going to hopefully the path that leads them to that gold medal. So it's just about understanding that the effort you put in isn't pointless. And I guess the third and final, element I like to talk about is that idea of success. And when you see other people's success, how do you react to it? Because when you see people's success, fixed mindset approach is just to view it as, oh, they got lucky. Maybe get a bit jealous about it. That's just the way they are. You have that, they're just naturally gifted and they're just naturally lucky.
Yeah.
When actually people with a growth mindset look at people's success and go, you know what? If they can do it, I can do it. They choose, again, it's that choice. They choose to get inspired or choose to get motivated by that person's success. And once they get that, they'll drive themselves harder and put in more effort. And so again, it's that positive cycle. And again, I'm not saying I'm perfect. So there's times I've seen people's success, and as a human being, I can look at the success and get frustrated because I think, but I'm doing those things and look how much they did. But ultimately, that doesn't lead me anywhere. Just thinking about, so it's ultimately going, okay, well, what are the things that they're doing that I'm missing? I've reached out to people, and I don't ever be afraid, with social media, to reach out to people. I was once told, have someone in your line of business, have someone who's a year ahead of you, someone who's 3 years ahead of you, and someone who's 10 years ahead of you, and get in touch with them all. And I've done that, and you'd be astonished at the people that will get back to you, who have been in your position and want to help and I've now at the other side of it, where I've had people who are just starting to get into they're looking into maybe becoming a keynote speaker, doing some mindset coaching. They've maybe done a Google search and they've found me and they've got in touch, and I'm immediately so quick to get back to them because I know how much it meant to me when I was starting out to hear from people that were ahead of me.
Yeah.
And so that's the viewpoint. If there are people, of course, there's going to be people that's more successful than you, but don't get annoyed about it. Kind of learn and maybe follow their path to a degree before you start to branch out and doing your own thing. And that's something I've learned more recently is I am in an industry where there is a kind of a path, but I also know I offer and provide something slightly different. So it's finding that balance.
Yeah. There's a ton of stuff there that I could comment. I didn't want to interrupt you. You were saying so much good stuff. But there's a few things I've touched upon in previous episodes. I did one on the microwave mentality, which is really that want for the success that someone has worked 3, 4, 5, 10 years for, that people want right now. And I see it within my own industry. As a fight director, I trained for 7 years before I was doing television stuff, and then I get into television and film, and I've now been 25 years in it, but people come in and they want what I've got right now. And whereas I would be willing to help some of them, move in the right direction, what actually people want is for me to hand them the gigs that I've got. Yeah. It's a very strange headspace. I
think it comes from, again, the generation that we're in, and everything being so quick and everything being so instant, and it's a difficult one. What I often say to people is, like, this is where earlier I talked about taking opportunities and trying things and building your little toolbox or a little skill set of different things you can do, because the time is going to pass you by anyway. So if it's going to pass you by, you're as well taking as many opportunities as you possibly can, in knowing that when you get to your 2nd, 3rd, 5th, 7th year, that you're going to have a lot of things that maybe people that start at the same time as you don't have. But it's very difficult. I mean, again, working with teens, as you can imagine, it's very, very difficult. I talked earlier at the very start of this podcast about how when I was asked as a 15-year-old, what do you want to do when you're older? My answer was, I think as a lot of teens, I don't know. I don't know in schools today has been replaced with, I'm going to be a YouTuber, or I'm going to be an influencer.
Yeah.
So then I go, cool, that's great. What are you doing currently as a 15-year-old to do that and to be an influencer, to be a YouTuber? And they won't even have a channel. And it's more that their mindset is in love with the idea of this idea that I'll just go onto YouTube and I'll just talk in front of a camera and I'll get money.
I mean, it's almost almost full circle to what you were saying earlier about taking action.
Yeah. So you need, and I'll never say to, I know there is some teacher out there, I'll be like, oh, you can't do that, get a real job. I'm like, no, you can, you absolutely can do that. Yeah. But you need to do something now, because that market, although it is relatively new, there's now YouTubers that start their career at 6 and 7 years old.
Yeah.
So by the time they get to 15, it's becoming like the sports world, in that it's really, I learned this the hard way with my table tennis career, it's really the guy that's put the most time in usually wins. And I learned that. I was playing for Ireland and I was doing very well, and I went to the UK finals, which that year actually was held in Glasgow. And I came over and there was the Welsh guy, they weren't great. The Welsh, no apologies if anyone's Welsh. And then you've got your Scottish guys that we had a really good match. It was quite even. But the English guy was just like incredible. Like, he absolutely, thrashed me. I was embarrassed. Mm-hmm. And afterwards, my coach sort of said, why did he beat you? And I instantly went into he's bigger than me. His arms are longer. Yeah. I have a bit of a cold, whatever. And my coach just sort of said, like, it could be, but you know how you train sort of 12 hours a week? He actually trains 20. So he trains before school. And remember that week you missed training because you had your exams? Remember the time you missed training because it was someone's birthday? And he pointed out all the times I'd missed training and just sort of said every time you missed training, he was training.
Yeah.
And it is a numbers game a lot of the time when it comes to being good at anything. So it's just trying to get the mentality into people that actually to get good at something, to become an expert in your field, it's going to take time. And I get that with the modern world that we live in, everything's so instant that can be a hard thing to grasp. But as long as, even if it's difficult to grasp, you're doing something.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've met a lot of young people, 19, 20, who just have this idea that they're going to do amazing things within a year or two. And no doubt a lot of them will be able to do that, but the majority it's going to take a long time. And that's where the resilience comes back to it. You know, how much time and effort are you willing to put into something? I often ask people when I'm working, you know, if you think of whatever goal you've got in your mind, so think of your top priority right now, whatever that is. If I asked you a really stupid question and said, as a percentage, how much success would you love to get from that goal in your mind? Everyone's going to say 100%. Of course, you want 100% of the success of your goal. But then I ask people, okay, how much as a percentage are you putting into that goal in terms of effort? And the average answer is usually 60%. Now that's good, but you have to understand, if you're putting in 60% of effort towards something, you're most likely going to get around 60% of the reward.
Yeah.
Which is fine. That could be a starting point, as long as you realize that that's the level you may end up with. Not always, but often that's the case. So it's kind of like, well, okay, we want this thing, but we need to put more effort than you're currently putting in.
Yeah. Brilliant.
In whatever capacity that is, yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, I think we've kind of talked long enough. There's so much stuff in there. I didn't want to interrupt you. You know, I've got thoughts and some opinions, and I've actually done some episodes which have touched upon a few of the things you've been talking about. But it was just so good what you were saying there that I didn't want to interrupt. So
no, I appreciate it.
Kind of want to wrap up a little bit, but can you just tell people? And I've got to tell people before I say this that your website's absolutely awesome, and there's tons of information on there about you and how they can get a hold of you and stuff. But can you tell people where they can get a hold of you, what your links are and stuff for social media?
Yeah. So I just have the handle on most social medias, same as my website. It's just at Dee Bleakley. It's Dee, and then Bleakley is a weird Irish spelling, but it's Bleakley. So it kind of looks like it's spelled Bleakley, which is really rubbish for a kind of a motivational speaker. But it's Dee Bleakley. So I'm on mainly on Instagram, and I'm on Twitter. Also, then my website is just www.deebleakley.com. And yeah, I get people who get in touch with me, you know, direct messages, emails. There's, you know, links on the website and things like that. With all sorts of stuff. Obviously, there's elements of that or for events and things. But no, I'm always very happy to, you know, at the end of every event, I tell people to get in touch, you know, because when I speak to a large group of people, I can't individually speak to them all, but I would love to. And so after events, I do spend a lot of time chatting to people. But, you know, the message is get in touch. If you've got any sort of ideas or things you want to do, like my value system is very simple. I just want to help people. That ultimately is what I try to do on a daily basis. I'm trying to get people to understand they're a lot more capable than they are, and they have a lot more potential than they maybe think they do. And that's the important part. The idea that they think they don't have, the minute you think that you don't have much potential is the minute that you probably don't. So it's about getting people to understand how capable they are and having that mindset. There's, again, I know we're looking at wrapping up. There's so many things I've got centered around the idea of telling yourself something and how that can manifest, you know, the kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. And, you know, it's silly, but, you know, when I was at school, I wasn't very good at chemistry. I was good at actually most subjects. I was all right at most things, at least average at most things, but not chemistry. And I remember I got my very first report card, and my dad looked at it and he said, "Okay, this is looking good, son. You're good at most things here. Apart from chemistry, that's not so good. But don't worry about that," because I was no good at chemistry either in high school. And right there and then, my mindset was like, "Oh, cool. It's like a genetic thing." You know, yeah. I'm not good at chemistry. I'll probably never be able to be good at chemistry. And of course, my attitude the next day in school was that there's no point in me being here.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, to my chemistry teacher, you know, the thing is, sir, I just runs in my family. My dad was no good at chemistry. And in fact, my mum was no good at chemistry. My granny was no good at chemistry. I think my dog's no good at it. So there's really no point in me being here. And of course, as soon as you tell yourself that, your grades just drop. And what I'm not wanting to tell people is that if you just turn around and tell yourself, I'm amazing at this, or I'm amazing at chemistry, that I suddenly would have been. Mm-hmm. What I'm saying is, if I had woken up every morning and told myself, you know what, I'm going to get better at this, or I will get better at this, I can get better at this, at the very least, I would have put a little bit more effort in. Yeah. And at the very least, I know the stats will show me that if I put a little bit more effort in, my grades probably wouldn't have been quite as bad.
Yeah.
So it's about having that little bit of self-belief, I guess. And that's a really cheesy, corny term I tried to move out, not say out loud, you'll believe in yourself. Because it's cheesy because we see it in movies and music and little motivational posters that say believe in yourself. But there is an element of that. It's like if you're sitting there right now and you really want to do something, you really want to achieve something, why on earth would you ever expect anyone else to believe in your idea if you don't really believe in it in the first place? And you have to be the first person to be, you know what, that's exactly what I'm going to go and do and achieve. And once you really start to believe it, other people might start to as well.
That's fantastic. I was going to ask you if you had any final thoughts, but I think you've more than covered it there. And I will add all the links to your social media onto the show notes for this episode as well. But do you have anything else you want to cover before we wind up?
I'll just leave on a little riddle I like to give people sometimes when I finish off talks. It's a very simple riddle, but if there's 10 birds all sitting on a telephone line, 10 of them are sitting there, and 5 of those birds decide to fly away, how many are left? Your immediate reaction is to say, well, there's 5. But it's a riddle, so you know the answer. There's not going to be 5. If there's 10 birds on a telephone line and 5 decide to fly away, there's still 10 sitting there because 5 birds only decided they were going to fly away. So I guess my wish for everyone is, I know that right now, you could be sitting there and you've got this idea in your head or your heart, your gut, of something you really want to achieve or do. How many times in your life have you decided you're going to do that thing? You're going to talk to that person. You're going to go for that job. You're going to give to charity. How many times did we decide? We decide, and we never actually do any of it. So I'd love people to take this little moment of self-reflection and think to themselves, okay, I'm going to stop telling myself I'm going to do that. I'm going to take that positive action, stop deciding, and actually take it. And the minute we turn that positive thinking into positive action, we start to see real success.
Dee Bleakley, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure.
And I really enjoyed talking to Dee there. He was a fantastic guest. Remember, this is only the second interview that I've actually done, so I'm still finding my feet a little bit, but he was just full of incredible advice and has this brilliant and positive outlook on the world, and he was kind of, for me, the perfect guest, and I hope that you got something out of it too. All of his links will be in the show notes, so if you would like to get in touch with him, then just check those out. And I want to add as well, something we didn't mention during the show, is that Dee is available to speak anywhere on the planet. He does travel, he does regularly speak abroad. So if you would like him to work with you or work with your group and you're not based in the UK, don't be afraid to reach out and talk to him about that. I'll be releasing another episode in just a few days, which I think is going to be another solo show. I'm recording another interview this afternoon, which will probably go out after that. And as things are moving fast and furious here on the show, I can't exactly say what the topic will be, but give me a couple of days and I'll put that information out on social networking. I've got a couple of ideas. I might make it about something simple like comfort eating, which I think is possibly something you're having trouble with right now. Or I had an idea about just being flexible and adaptable and being able to pivot. Like I released this season 2.5 weeks before I was planning to, and I've chucked out 6 of the episodes that I was going to be doing it on because I felt I needed to pivot and react to the current situation, the coronavirus situation. So that's maybe something that would be interesting as well. We'll just see. Or maybe I'll combine the two and do a mixed episode. And there's no call to action other than to appeal to you. If you genuinely get something out of this show, to please help me promote it. I mean, I say the same thing every week. Please help. Remember that this show is on all of the apps. It's on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Podbean, Castbox, Stitcher, Spotify, all of the biggies, and most of the small ones as well. Or it can be listened to in a browser by going to filmproproductivity.com. So if you've got a friend that you think could benefit from this show, please, I beg you, please send it along to them. I do this show to help people, and the more people that it can help, the better for all concerned. And if you've got any questions as well for a future show, please send them to filmproproductivity@gmail.com. with the words mailbag episode in the subject line. I've done 2 mailbag episodes so far. I've got no other questions have come in since the last one, possibly because I've not asked for any. So I'm asking you now, if you've got a question and you think I can answer it, and it's on the topic of productivity, time management, success, mental health, something like that. If you listen to the show, you'll know the stuff I talk about. If you think I can give you an answer, if I can shed some light on it, please fire it along. filmproproductivity@gmail.com and the words mailbag episode in the subject line. For now, though, I'd like to once again thank Dee Bleakley for giving us his time and his wisdom, and I'll end the episode with these words from Wayne Dyer. A positive mindset, not a doomsday mentality, supports being exceptional. Now take control of your own destiny. Keep on shooting, and join me next time on Film Pro Productivity and Success. The music that you can hear right now is Adventures by Ehumitsu. You can view the show notes for this episode on the official website, filmproproductivity.com. And you can follow my personal accounts on Twitter and Instagram at fight_director, or follow the show instead on Twitter at FilmProProdPod or on Facebook at FilmProProductivity. Please support the show by subscribing, spreading the word, and leaving an awesome review.